So when I first opened ZBrush a few years ago, I had no idea what was going on. It was super easy to get overwhelmed. There are buttons everywhere, menus, palettes, sub-palettes, and most of it didn't really make sense yet. So in this video, I want to strip it all back. I want to show you a handful of things that I wish I knew straight away when I was starting with ZBrush, kind of like the real foundation that will help you to actually sculpt or start sculpting without getting stuck. Hey, if you're new around here, my name is Pablo. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is fun, clear, and actually doable. So in this video, we're gonna treat it kind of like an introduction to ZBrush. I would assume that you have no idea what I'm talking about or what a menu is or a subtool. So if you've never heard of ZBrush or you just heard about it and want to get into it, but the first time that you open it, you felt like really overwhelmed, this video is for you. If you already have some knowledge from ZBrush, maybe you are approaching certain things the wrong way. So there's still some golden nuggets throughout this video that I'm sure you're going to find useful. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here we are in ZBrush, and we're gonna aim to create something like this for your first character, something very, very simple, but with some kind of personality. And hopefully I will show you some of the most essential tools and processes in ZBrush so that you can get started. But when you look at ZBrush, look at this interface. It is pretty crazy and overwhelming if it is the first time that you open it. Plus, this is just a custom UI. So I'm actually simplifying it to my workflow, even though it looks like I have a bunch of extra buttons. So what I want to do is something that is very counterintuitive, and some people might disagree with me, but this is something that I have found to be really, really helpful for all my students. And it's just a simple way to understand this craziness of the software, because it is very, very powerful, but it has a lot of things. So it could be very overwhelming. Now, before I get started, I just want to show you a comparison so that you have an understanding of why it is important to set the foundations right. So the difference between this rather simple character and something a bit more complex, like this character that has a lot of details and a lot of intricate patterns and, you know, even pores and all of that, the difference between these two characters is actually just time. There's no a hidden method or anything that I would say it would make this character better than the simple sort of stylized little creature. It's just time, and you have the time, right? So it is just about learning the foundations, the basics, and then you spend the time refining them. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and tackle the first 3 secrets because they are super important. All right, so let's start with secret number 1. There are multiple ways of doing the same thing in ZBrush. So that is one of the most important and fundamental parts, because when you start doing tutorials, when you start trying to learn ZBrush, you're gonna find different artists that do the same thing in different ways. Some of them do it faster, some of them do it a little bit more precise. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of like the same goal, different approaches. So the fact that you know how to do something doesn't mean that it is the wrong way, the best way, you know, the slow way. It's just the way that it works for you. So the whole point is to be able to recognize that there are multiple ways of doing the same thing. And when you learn a technique that might help you go a little bit faster in the way that you do something, then you can adapt to it. So that brings me to my second secret of learning ZBrush, which is systematize before you optimize. So that is absolutely crucial, because I see a lot of my students as well, they want to jump into details, or they want to jump into customizing brushes because that is going to produce something a little bit faster. The thing is, if you don't understand the core and the fundamentals and the basics, you're trying to optimize something without covering the system. So my recommendation would be, and this is probably the most important thing, is to learn the system or create a system for yourself. In other words, if you want to create the head of a character, try to find the system that works for you with the tools that I'm going to give you. You create a sphere, then you put 2 eyes, and that's it. That is your system. So 2 or 3 steps. And then you realize, oh, there's actually a simpler way to add eyes. There's a simple way or a faster way to do the topology of the head, or I can start with a base mesh. Those are things to optimize after you have the system. So very, very important. Just try to find the steps that work for you based on what I'm going to give you, and then optimize on those. And that's why there's YouTube, there is courses online that will teach you multiple ways, and then you just pick and choose whatever works for you to optimize the system that created for you. So that is super important. Now, the third secret in ZBrush is actually a shift in the mindset, because ZBrush is very, very different from any other 3D application that you might have experienced. And the secret really is to embrace the difference, because that's where the strength of ZBrush lies. ZBrush is a very powerful software, but it's very, very unique because of the way that it was developed. So it's not necessarily, well, you could say that it's a 3D software right now, but it wasn't conceived originally as a 3D software. So a lot of the things that you might find in Maya, 3D Max, or Blender, or all of those 3D packages is not going to be the same. So if you come to ZBrush expecting to manipulate the camera in the same way and have like a viewport, for example, then you're gonna be disappointed and you're gonna be frustrated because it's not the same. So that is just to say it's a shift in mindset and approach ZBrush and embrace it because of the unique software that it is. And don't worry, this is all a bit abstract, but I'm gonna give you specific points on how to get started with it. So with those 3 secrets of learning ZBrush out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the practical steps. All right, so here is the secret sauce for this tutorial. We're gonna go ahead and customize the UI completely. And I know that this is counterintuitive because it's usually one of the things that you learn at the end after you understand some of the basics, but this will help you prevent getting overwhelmed by all the different things that are in ZBrush. So let me just go ahead and reset everything so that you can see exactly what I see. I'm gonna initialize ZBrush. Don't worry, this is not part of the step. This is just so that whenever you open ZBrush, I can show you exactly what you see. So let's go to the standard UI. All right, so this is roughly what you see when you open ZBrush, right? And if your first instinct is to just click somewhere in here, you're gonna get this, right? And this is extremely frustrating. It doesn't matter what you choose, it's always gonna be like that because what you see here is the 2.5D feature of ZBrush that is not a 3D object. You're just literally painting on the canvas with a 3D information. So you're literally painting on a canvas, on a 2.5D canvas with information in material, color, and depth. So that's why you can see this is almost like generating a bit of depth as well. Don't worry, this is one of the most frustrating things for people, but we're not gonna even start with this. So let's go ahead and hold the Control and N, and this is to clear the canvas. And that just basically erases everything. We're gonna get into the 3D objects in just a bit, but first we're gonna go ahead and remove absolutely everything that we don't need and concentrate on one of the essential things in ZBrush, which is the 3D objects and the navigation. So let's go ahead and click on Preferences, go to Config, and click on Enable Customize. So you see when I click on this, everything kind of like shifts a little bit. That is because it's ZBrush telling us that we can now customize the UI, which is very, very simple. So I'm gonna hold the Control and the Alt key, super important. And with the left click, I'm gonna click on this homepage. I'm gonna click and drag it into the center, anywhere in here. So that removes that button. We don't need any of that. We don't need the lightbox. So let's repeat that. Control, Alt, click and drag in here. We don't need any of this. We're gonna leave the Edit, Draw, Move, Scale, and Rotate as it is. We're also gonna leave this one as it is. We don't need this one. Control, Alt, drag. We don't need any of this. We're going to remove all of this stuff. So Control, Alt, left click and drag. So we're removing anything that we don't need at this point. Don't worry, all of these things are important, of course, but we don't want them to distract us from the point at hand, which is learning how to navigate first. So let's remove all of this stuff. And don't worry, we can just go ahead and reset it back to normal. So I'm just gonna go ahead and speed things up a little bit. Let's go ahead and remove everything from the left-hand side. So Control, Alt, click and drag. And from the right-hand side, we're gonna remove a few things. We're gonna get rid of this one. We're gonna leave all of these 4 items. We're gonna also remove perspective, floor, symmetry, all of this stuff. We don't need any of that. Again, super important stuff, but we're not focusing on this. We're gonna leave frame, move, zoom 3D, and rotate. We're gonna leave those for the time being. We're gonna remove this, and this. All right, so pretty simple. And the next thing I wanna do is I wanna collapse this. So if I double click on these arrows you see here, this is gonna collapse what is called the trace. So right now, we don't have anything. We just have our canvas, which personally, I don't like this gradient. I'll show you how to change that. And we have a few buttons in here, and we're gonna concentrate on navigation. So that is step 1 of this series. So let's go ahead and deal with the canvas first, just to clean it up. We're gonna go to Document, because this is one of the main difference between a 3D application that you might have been familiar with and ZBrush, that there is no viewport. It's just a canvas, like similar to Photoshop in a way. So I'm gonna go to the new document, and I'm gonna leave this W size enabled. So that is going to look at the entire width of this window, and it's gonna create a new document based on that. So let's click on new document, and it's gonna ask us the document is gonna change. Would you like to save the changes? I wanna say no. That's it. And you see how now we have this nice wide document with nothing else. Now this annoying square that you see here, this is why there's nothing wrong with this. It's actually really useful. It's called the thumbnail, but we don't need it as well. So let's go to Preferences, and let's scroll all the way down to where it says Thumbnail here. And we're gonna click on Thumbnail, and that's it. We're gonna get out of this. Now, if you accidentally, because again, it had happened to me before, if you have this and you wanna go out and you click outside, you accidentally do this, and you think, oh, this is a 3D sphere, let's just move it. And then you start painting, then you get frustrated again because this is 2.5D. So you're just painting, you're not adding any 3D object, but it does look like a 3D object. So we're gonna go ahead and hold Control and N. This is gonna become one of the most important shortcuts when you're getting started, just to clean this up. So Control N. All right. So you might be wondering, why do we do all of this and why don't we see any 3D object in this document? Well, the reason why is because by default, if we open up the right tray, again, this is where we have all the palettes, and you can think about this like drawers where you have your tools. That's essentially what the name is, a tool. So you have a drawer with tools and different palettes, and you can put anything wherever you want. So later on, we can take the render palette, we can just drop it in there, and you'll see it's now in this drawer. So I'm gonna remove it by clicking on this button. We don't have to know any of this just yet, but you'll see that the tool that I have, if you're thinking about with the same analogy that you have a toolbox, this could be your hammer or your saw or anything that you're doing with carpentry. So we have this tool, and this larger thumbnail, if you click on it, it allows you to choose some of the basic tools. And you'll see that we have the quick pick, we have 3D meshes, and then we have 2.5D brushes. So the 2.5D brushes, all they do is imagine like a Photoshop version that has depth, and it also holds information of the material. So let's say if I take this sphere brush and do this, now when I draw in 2.5D, I'm just basically painting with depth and material, of course, right? So this is pretty fun, but you cannot rotate things around because it is 2.5D. So again, kind of like imagine a Photoshop on steroids because it has information in the material as well as depth. Control N, I'm gonna keep repeating that just to clear the canvas. Let's click again on this thumbnail, and we can choose anything that we want. But today we're gonna focus on actually doing something. So we're gonna use some of these primitives, some of these 3D meshes. Now, the one that I want you to choose is the Arrow 3D. The reason I want you to choose that is because we're concentrating at the moment on navigation, but we do need to have some kind of object. So let's click on this Arrow 3D. And when you click on it, you'll see the arrow here, but you don't see it anywhere in the canvas, right? So when you click and drag, you can let go, and then you have your arrow. Great. So the next thing that you instinctively will go ahead and do is, all right, I'm gonna click outside to rotate, and boom, you have more arrows. And then you get frustrated because every time that you click, you're dropping an arrow. But this is fundamental to ZBrush. You need to understand that when you have an object and you haven't got into the 3D space, all you're doing is kind of like imagine a paintball gun, and you're just shooting at the wall. Every time that you shoot is going to be painting whatever you have selected, in this case, an arrow 3D. If you actually want to manipulate that arrow, you need to enter in edit mode. So let's hold Control N. I told you I was going to use this quite a few times. And let's do it once. So click and drag once. So we basically just shot once this canvas or this arrow into the canvas. And then you see, as soon as I drop something, we have this edit button that went from grayed out to something that we can choose. If you didn't see, let me just clear the canvas and try it again. So click and drag, and now I'm going to click on edit. The shortcut is the letter T. But again, this is one of the things that I mentioned before, that is important to know the system before you optimize. So this is a very clear example of what I'm saying. Even though T is the shortcut to enter edit mode, and I can, because I remember that, I can use that faster, it is important to know that what is happening is that you're entering in this edit mode, all right? Otherwise, it will become a little bit cumbersome. So let me just go ahead and undo that, and we are back to where we dropped the arrow. So instead of pressing the letter T, I'm just gonna click on edit, done. So the first thing you notice is that we have this additional kind of like line around it, and we have this head with some axis. This will tell us that we are in the edit mode, we are in 3D. So if you use the left click button and click around, you see how I'm just rotating that object in 3D. So just anywhere that you click outside the model in the canvas, that allows you to rotate the model around and just move it, right? So that's the first thing, just how to rotate around the model. Now, the next thing I want to do is collapse my tool because I already have my arrow. I don't need another one just yet. And you'll notice that we have very similar things. We have things that say move, scale, and rotate. And here we have zoom, scroll, A, have, actual. And here we have move, zoom 3D, rotate. So it could become very, very confusing if this is kind of like the first time you're using ZBrush. But the thing is, we have a few ways to manipulate, and like I said at the beginning, a few ways of doing the same thing. So if you click on this move, if I just click and drag, this is pretty much how you move things in ZBrush. And if for some reason you move this away and you lost it, you can click on frame, and it will just frame that to the center of the canvas. So again, click and drag, that's how you move. but it will be a little bit hard to just, do this all the time. So even though the button is there, it's just going to be very hard to find the right place. So don't worry. I know this is frustrating, or at least it was for me, but it is important to know that this is here for a reason, and this is why, or this is how you move around in ZBrush. Now, the same thing goes for zoom in 3D. So if I click and drag, you're zooming in and out, right? And you notice it says zoom 3D, whereas in here, it just says zoom. We're going to come back to this in just a bit. And then we have rotate, right? So these are your three main navigation, and well, a fourth one if you want to just frame it. But these are the absolute main things that you need to move around ZBrush. So you're basically moving that arrow in the canvas. You are zooming in and out, right? So pushing that arrow backwards or forward, and then you're rotating it, right? Like I said, it is important to know the system before you optimize it. So a simple way to optimize this instead of just relying on these buttons is to know the navigation with the mouse. So I'm going to show you, don't worry, how to do that. But first, let me cover why this is here. So we have this scroll that kind of like does the same thing as we did before, but this is not moving the actual arrow. It's actually moving the document. So if I zoom in and out, it's actually doing the same thing, right? It's zooming the entire document. The actual is the full document, and the AA have is kind of like a half version of that is going to show things a lot crispier. Now, this is the main thing to understand about the document, that the document itself has its resolution, and the 3D has nothing to do with that canvas. So in other words, you can go quite close in terms of the document, right? So this is, imagine the same thing as zooming into a document in Photoshop where you can see the pixels, and this has nothing to do with the resolution of the mesh, right? So I can just go ahead and use these ones to move out. So I'm going to push this out, and you see if I move this around, let's rotate this a little bit more, the resolution or the pixel size is not changing. That is because, like I said, it's independent from the document. So the simplest way to look at it is that the document is actually just a window into the 3D space, and then you can define the resolution of the window before you get started. And it doesn't really matter, you can do it afterwards, but it's just good to know the difference. So I'm going to go ahead and click on AA half, all right? Or actually, it doesn't matter at this point. So I'm going to click on actual, and we see the full size of that document. Great. So now that we see this, we can just go ahead and zoom in and have a clearer version of our 3D object. But very, very important that you know and understand the difference between the document and this navigation here for the 3D space. The next thing I want to show you is that you have your move, scale, and rotate. Those are actually Gizmo controllers to rotate not the camera around the object, but the object itself. So in order to see this, you don't have to do this, but I need to show you with another example. So don't worry about this step. You can just ignore it if you're following along. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate, and I'm going to have two arrows. All right, so I have two arrows, and I'm going to bring in my move brush. And what you see here is the gizmo in ZBrush, right? You might also see something that looks like this. That is the transpose line. We're not going to get into that, but in case you see this, all you need to do is click on this button. So this basically switches between the transpose line and the Gizmo 3D. That's it. And with this gizmo, you can just move things around. So now we have like a couple of arrows. Let's go back to draw, which removes that gizmo. So we have a couple of arrows, but we can now rotate and zoom around the two arrows, right? So essentially these buttons right here, they have to do with the camera. Like that's the closest thing you can think of if you come from a different 3D application. So these ones right here have to do with the camera. These ones right here at the top have to do with the document. And these ones right here have to do with the manipulation of the object itself. All right, so let me just back it up a little bit. Don't worry, you don't need to know any of this. We're gonna go back in here, collapse this, and we are good to go. All right, so here is the trick. We have our first system. We understand these three sections here, and we understand how to, with the tools, how to move and scale and all of that within this area. But now what we need to do is optimize this tiny system so that we can move and work a little bit faster. So that is the essence of this entire kind of like series of introduction to ZBrush. So what I'll do here is I'm gonna make sure that in the preferences, in the configuration, we still have this enable customize so that we can customize the UI. And I'm gonna hold the Control and the Alt key again, and the left click to drag this out. So we don't need any of these, all right? And the same thing goes for the document. We don't need to move or change anything on the document. We already have it. So I'm gonna remove all of that. Great. So we're just going to leave these ones right here, just for the sake of demo, but we don't really need them at this point. And we're just going to concentrate on nailing the navigation, because once you can navigate freely in ZBrush, then 50% of the battle is already won. So let's go ahead and learn the navigation in an easy way. So if you use the left click anywhere on the canvas, click and drag, that allows you to rotate the model. So I'm going to click and drag from top to bottom, and that rotates in the axis from left to right, right? And then you can just go ahead and move things around. Perfect. So that is the rotation around the model. We don't need to rely on those buttons anymore. We just need to click with the left click anywhere in the canvas and rotate. Now, there is an alternative that you can just use the right click and also move around. The main difference is that if you're sculpting, you're going to use your left click to sculpt. So if you're over your mesh and you click, is going to actually add volume. But if you use the right click, you can actually rotate even when the mouse is on top of the model. So all of that is just to say that you can either use the left click or the right click if you are outside on the canvas. It doesn't matter. If you have the model really, really close to the camera and you don't see any part of the canvas, that's when you can use the right click if you want to. So a couple of ways of doing it. Now, to be able to pan around, you can use the Alt key and the right click or the left click, again, independently of which one you want to use. The main difference being that you can right click from over the model, but if you use the left click, it's going to, affect it. So to keep it really, really simple, just use the right click. That's it. So right click to move around, Alt and right click to pan around, and then to zoom in and out, you can use the Control and the right click. There is a slightly more complicated navigation, but again, if you're curious about it, there's ways of you to learn about it. I'm just gonna keep it super simple. So a quick recap with the Control, the Alt, and just the right click. So right click to rotate around, Alt, right click to move, pan around, and then Control and right click to zoom in and out. That is the simplest way of navigating. So now we're gonna do a quick exercise because, like I said, if you can navigate quickly in ZBrush, you have half of the battle already won. So the idea is just to create a path based on this arrow. That's why I choose an arrow. So let's go ahead and put this around here, and I'm gonna rotate around like so. And I'm gonna drop this image into the canvas. Again, this might sound counterintuitive because it's not one of the first things that you learn in ZBrush, but it's very important. So if you press the Shift and S, what you're doing is taking a screenshot and drop it into the canvas. So I just pressed Shift and S, but now I can move my arrow, and you see there is an arrow here. That is because this arrow is now a 2.5D arrow. So if I hold the Control and N to clear the canvas, which we've done before many times, it's going to remove anything that is a 2.5 image, and then we go back to our 3D. So I'm gonna repeat it in here. Let's put it in there and press Shift S to drop that into the canvas, and then we can move the rest. So the idea is to create a path, something that goes kind of like in and out. So I'm gonna rotate this like so, Shift S to drop this shape on the canvas. I'm gonna zoom out, rotate it like so, Shift S, then I'm gonna move this way. And then you can make your own path, of course, but feel free to either pause this at this stage and concentrate on trying to find the right angles, Shift S, and create your path. So this would allow you to concentrate on things like rotation, scale, or zoom of the camera, and understanding that idea of what the 2.5D is, as well as the 3D. So all I'm doing at this point is pressing the Shift key, drop them in the canvas. Maybe this way we can start bringing this closer, Shift S. And I know this doesn't seem like too much. We're far from, or it might seem like we're very far from that character that I showed you before. But believe me, this is one of the things that we need to get through, especially if you're new to ZBrush, because it is one of the pillars and one of the main things that you need to learn. All right, so that is it, right? So we now have a path that follows that arrow, and you see in some points kind of like come closer to the camera, in other points it just goes further away. So feel free to pause the video right here and just do this exercise. Try to get something, and before we move forward, you need to feel very comfortable with this type of navigation.